You sit across from someone, and everything on the surface looks right. They are smiling at the right moments, saying the right words, responding exactly the way a warm, genuine person should. And yet, something inside you doesn't relax. It doesn't soften. Instead, it goes quiet, almost cold, as if a deeper part of your mind has already reached a conclusion that your conscious thoughts haven't caught up to yet. There is no obvious proof, nothing you could point to or explain out loud, but something feels off in a way that is impossible to ignore. Maybe it's the smile that stops just short of the eyes, or a voice that rises slightly at the wrong moment, or a fleeting expression that flashes across their face before it disappears behind a more controlled version. These are details most people never notice, but your brain does. Instantly, automatically, without asking for permission. And the most unsettling part is not that you notice them, but that you understand them without knowing how you understand them. You can't explain it logically. You can't defend it in a conversation, but you know. You always know. And over time, that constant, involuntary awareness becomes heavy because it doesn't turn off. It follows you into conversations, into relationships, into every interaction where something is said, but something else is meant. What seems like an advantage from the outside slowly becomes a quiet burden on the inside, the weight of seeing what cannot easily be proven and feeling what cannot easily be shared. What you are experiencing is not some mystical intuition or a mysterious sixth sense. It is something far more grounded in how your brain is wired to process information. At its core, this ability comes from the interaction of two cognitive mechanisms working together at high speed. The first is called thin slicing, the brain's capacity to extract meaningful patterns from extremely small fragments of data in a very short amount of time. Instead of needing long conversations or obvious signals, your mind picks up on subtle shifts in tone, micro changes in posture, or tiny inconsistencies in timing. The second mechanism is the detection of incongruence, the automatic recognition that something does not align. It is the moment your brain notices that a person's words are saying one thing, but their body, voice, or expression is telling a completely different story. Most people process social interactions like an audience watching a performance, focusing on the script and taking it at face value. But your mind operates differently. It is not just watching the stage, it is observing everything behind it. It notices the tension in the actor's hands, the slight hesitation before a line, the cracks in the performance that were never meant to be seen. This is why your perception often feels immediate and undeniable. You are not guessing, and you are not imagining things. Your brain is rapidly integrating multiple layers of information that others either overlook or filter out entirely. What feels like intuition is actually precision, happening so fast that it appears effortless, even to you. One of the most powerful signals your brain is picking up comes from something called microexpressions, a concept studied extensively by psychologist Paul Ekman. These are extremely brief facial expressions, often lasting less than 1/25th of a second, that reveal a person's genuine emotion before it is consciously masked or replaced by a socially acceptable version. They happen too fast for most people to notice, which is why they often go completely undetected in everyday interactions. But for a perceptive mind, these flashes are not invisible at all. In fact, they can become one of the clearest indicators that something beneath the surface does not match what is being presented. You might hear someone congratulate you, their words perfectly phrased, their tone seemingly supportive. Yet, in that fraction of a second before their expression settles, something else appears, a flicker of tension, a trace of disappointment, or a hint of resentment. Your brain registers that moment instantly, even if you cannot consciously replay it. And just like that, a quiet internal signal is triggered. Something is not right. This process is not deliberate, and it is not something you are actively searching for. It happens automatically as your mind continuously scans for authenticity and alignment. Over time, these tiny emotional leaks become patterns, and those patterns become clarity. While others rely on what is said, you are responding to what briefly escapes control. And in those fleeting moments, the truth often reveals itself before it can be hidden again. At a certain point, this ability goes far beyond simply detecting when someone is being dishonest. You are no longer just noticing inconsistencies in what people say. you begin to see the underlying reasons behind why they act the way they do. It becomes less about the surface behavior and more about the psychological structure driving it. When someone constantly boasts about their achievements, you do not just hear confidence, you sense the insecurity underneath, the need to prove something that was never validated. When a person tries to control every situation or dominate conversations, you do not just see authority, you recognize the fear of losing control, the anxiety of uncertainty that they are trying to suppress. When someone repeatedly positions themselves as a victim, gaining sympathy and attention, you start to notice patterns of manipulation, a subtle way of influencing others without appearing responsible. This shift happens because your brain is not only detecting patterns over time, but also combining them with a deep theory of mind, the ability to infer what others are thinking and feeling beneath their external behavior. You begin to connect fragments: tone, timing, expression, repetition into a coherent psychological picture. What others interpret as isolated actions, you experience as part of a larger system. In that moment, behavior stops being random. It becomes predictable, meaningful, and often revealing in ways that are difficult to unsee. You are no longer just observing what people do, you are understanding why they do it. And once that layer becomes visible, every interaction carries a depth that most people never realize is there. There is a hidden cost to seeing people this clearly, and it often begins with something known as the Cassandra effect. You recognize what is real long before it becomes visible to others, yet when you try to express it, no one believes you. In fact, the reaction is often the opposite of what you expect. Instead of being seen as insightful, you are labeled as negative, overly critical, or even disruptive. People may say you are too sensitive, that you are overthinking, or that you are imagining problems that do not exist. This happens because most social systems are not built on raw truth, but on a shared agreement to maintain comfort. People rely on polite versions of reality, small illusions that allow interactions to remain smooth and predictable. These unspoken agreements act like a social glue, holding relationships together by avoiding what is inconvenient or uncomfortable. When you point out what lies beneath the surface, you are not just revealing information, you are breaking that agreement. And when that happens, the discomfort people feel does not get directed at the truth itself, but at you, the person who exposed it. You unintentionally make others feel psychologically exposed, as if something private has been brought into the light before they were ready. As a result, they defend themselves not by examining the truth, but by rejecting the source of it. Over time, you begin to notice a painful pattern. The more accurate your perception is, the more resistance you encounter. The clearer you see, the more isolated you feel. And slowly, without anyone ever saying it directly, you learn that seeing the truth is not always rewarded. Sometimes it makes you the problem in a world that is more comfortable looking away. The second trap is far more subtle, but in many ways more damaging, because it slowly erodes your ability to trust. When you spend enough time seeing through inconsistencies, noticing hidden motives, and catching the small cracks in people's behavior, your mind begins to generalize. What was once a skill for understanding becomes a lens that filters everything. A compliment is no longer just a compliment. It feels like it must serve a purpose. Kindness is not received at face value. It is questioned, analyzed, and often reduced to a strategy. Even silence becomes suspicious, interpreted as distance, disinterest, or a shift that signals something is about to go wrong. Your brain, trying to protect you, starts constructing possible explanations for every subtle change it detects, and most of those explanations lean toward the negative. This is where confirmation bias takes over. Once your mind forms the belief that people are hiding something, it begins to selectively gather evidence that supports that belief, while ignoring anything that contradicts it. Every delayed reply becomes proof of fading interest. Every moment of distraction becomes evidence of emotional withdrawal. You become incredibly skilled at building internal narratives that feel logical, consistent, and convincing. And in a way, you win every mental game. You are rarely caught off guard, rarely deceived in obvious ways. But the cost is that your inner world becomes a place where nothing is neutral anymore. Everything carries meaning, everything demands interpretation, and nothing can simply be experienced as it is. Trust, in its purest form, quietly disappears, replaced by constant analysis. And while this may feel like control, it is actually a form of exhaustion, because a mind that is always scanning for hidden threats can never truly rest. The third trap is the quietest, yet often the heaviest, the loneliness of being someone who sees everything. You understand people with a depth that allows you to anticipate their reactions, soften your words in the right moments, and say exactly what will make them feel safe, heard, or understood. You can read the emotional atmosphere of a room before anyone else notices it, adjusting yourself almost effortlessly to keep things smooth. And yet, in the middle of all that awareness, there is a growing realization that almost no one is doing the same for you. People respond to the version of you that you present, not the complexity you carry inside. They assume you are fine, strong, or self-sufficient, because you rarely show confusion or need. Meanwhile, you are holding layers of perception that you cannot easily share. You notice the tension in relationships, the instability beneath certain decisions, the emotional truths that sit just below the surface of conversations. But you also know that speaking those truths would not lead to understanding. It would lead to denial, discomfort, or rejection. So, you stay quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you already understand how it will be received. Over time, this creates a specific kind of isolation. You are surrounded by people, connected on the surface, yet internally alone with everything you see and cannot express. The deeper your understanding becomes, the harder it is to find someone who meets you at that level. And in that space, you begin to carry not just your own thoughts and emotions, but also the unspoken realities of others, with no clear place to put them down. The first principle that changes everything is something called strategic ignorance. And despite how it sounds, it is not about being unaware or pretending not to see the truth. It is about understanding that not every truth requires your reaction. When you are highly perceptive, the instinct is to respond to everything you notice, to correct, to point out, or at least to internally engage with every inconsistency you detect. But this is where exhaustion begins. The more important question is no longer whether you are right, because most of the time, you are. The real question becomes whether what you are seeing is actually yours to carry or to act upon. Does it directly affect your well-being, your boundaries, or your responsibilities? If it does not, then stepping back is not avoidance, it is wisdom. You learn to observe without inserting yourself into every situation, to recognize patterns without feeling obligated to fix them. You can see manipulation without confronting it, notice tension without trying to resolve it, and detect inauthenticity without needing to expose it. This is not denial, and it is not weakness. It is a conscious decision to protect your energy and your focus, because when you respond to everything, you slowly drain yourself on problems that were never yours to solve. Strategic ignorance allows you to remain aware without becoming consumed. You still see clearly, but you choose carefully where your attention and action go. And in that choice, something shifts. Your perception stops being a burden that pulls you into every situation and becomes a tool that serves you rather than controls you. The second principle is learning to understand that everyone wears a mask, and more importantly, that most of these masks are not created to deceive you, but to protect the person wearing them. When you see through people easily, it is natural to feel frustrated or even disturbed by the gap between who they present themselves to be and who they really are underneath. But if you look more closely, that gap often comes from pain, not manipulation. The person who appears arrogant may have spent years being overlooked or dismissed, building confidence as a shield against feeling insignificant. The one who seems distant or emotionally unavailable may have learned, through repeated hurt, that closeness is dangerous. These patterns are not strategies designed specifically to fool you. They are survival mechanisms shaped by past experiences. When you begin to understand this, something important changes inside you. The irritation softens, the need to expose or judge fades, and in its place, a deeper form of empathy begins to emerge. Not naive empathy that ignores reality, but conscious empathy that sees both the mask and the person behind it at the same time. You are no longer reacting to the surface, nor are you rejecting it entirely. Instead, you recognize that what you are seeing is part of a larger story, and from that place, your response becomes more grounded, more patient, and more human. You are not excusing harmful behavior, but you are no longer emotionally entangled in it. You understand without needing to fix, and that understanding brings a quiet sense of clarity that replaces frustration with perspective. The third principle is perhaps the most difficult, because it requires you to loosen the very habit that once made you feel safe, the constant need to analyze everything. When you are highly perceptive, your mind naturally tries to predict what might go wrong before it actually happens. It scans for patterns, calculates risks, and builds scenarios in advance, all with the intention of protecting you from future pain. On the surface, this feels like control, like preparation. But over time, it quietly begins to cost you something far more valuable: your ability to fully experience the present moment. When your mind detects even a small possibility that something could end badly, it starts to live inside that possibility as if it were already real. If there is a 20% chance that a relationship might fail, your thoughts begin to revolve around that 20%, analyzing it, preparing for it, and emotionally reacting to it long before anything has actually happened. And in doing so, you slowly lose access to the 80% that is still good, still real, and still unfolding right in front of you. Life becomes less about experiencing and more about anticipating. You stop feeling moments as they are, because you are too busy evaluating what they might become. Learning to step out of this pattern does not mean you suddenly become unaware or naive. It means you consciously choose at times to let the moment exist without dissecting it, to listen without analyzing tone, to enjoy without predicting an ending, to be present without turning every detail into a signal. This is not blindness, it is discipline. It is the decision to live, rather than constantly verify. And when you begin to practice this, something shifts. Your perception does not disappear, but it no longer dominates every experience. It becomes something you can turn down when needed, allowing space for calm, for connection, and for a kind of peace that analysis alone can never provide.